Hello and welcome to Hair in the Hawthorne. My name's Kate Ray and I'm your host, and as always we're talking all things strange, paranormal and slightly on the freaky side of things. It's all spooky. So today's guest is somebody that I came across from a lifelong love of Fortean Times Magazine. I've said this before on my YouTube channel. If you guys haven't checked out Fortean Times, get yourself the back copies of it and start subscribing. It is really, really good, really interesting for a plethora of subjects, and it covers everything from archaeological finds to ghost watch to conspiracy theories. It's just jam-packed with all the things that I know you're going to love. So my next guest is kind of in a column near the back, which is not really a place that I would have put him, and he reviews films in that column. And for me, the thing that kind of drew me in was I had a real soft spot in the early days for a guy called Reverend Lionel Fanthorpe. I'm glad I got his name right, because I struggle with his second name. And I'll tell you why that there's that connection with today's guest. I'll run through his bio and let you know what it's about. There is a bit of a plot twist at the end of this one, so bear with me. So he's an author. He's got a series of books out, which are the Matt Hunter series, and a book that I recently picked up and I've been flicking through, and I'm going to do a book review on this because it's such a good read that I think it deserves its own area in its own time, which is The Frighteners. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we're going along. He has a podcast, and I haven't been able to find the time to get to grips with this podcast really, but absolutely love the title. It intrigues me, and I am going to go away and spend some time looking at that, which is it the Creepy Cove? Have I got that right? Creepy Cove Community Church podcast?
That's right, yeah.
Perfect.
Rolls off the tongue.
It does, definitely. And even that title just saps me in and draws me in. So I've said he writes monthly for Fortean Times Magazine. He says he has a taste for macabre, so he's definitely in my book. The beautiful grotesque is my thing, so macabre definitely comes into that. I would like to think he's a fairly straightforward guest, but I'm going to give you a quote that comes from him that might give you an inkling of what the plot twist is here. So he said, "I met Dracula way before I met God." Which I just think is the quote of the century. It's really intriguing. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Reverend Peter Laws.
Hello.
That's the plot twist. It's so intriguing, that background that you come from, and we will delve into that because it's something that even with Reverend, I'm going to get this wrong, Reverend Lionel Fanthorpe, it was something that I just went, what? All the time with him, such a lovely guy.
Yeah, he is. He's lovely. I got to meet him last year at a conference.
No.
And, we had pizza together, and it's the first time I've ever met him in my life, and so I was kind of slightly fanboying when I was sitting with him. But his kindness and his kind of openness, and just being a person who I'd literally just met and yet was so kind of warm and giving. I thought he was great. But you're dead right though. That little factor, the thing about me being a minister, trained minister, church minister, tends to be the thing that like makes people go like, huh? And it's, in a way, it's kind of odd in a way, because like all the previous stuff is weird. I like, ghosts and monsters and vampires and all this sort of strange stuff, and always have. But I do find it fascinating how I do think, not to get too deep straight away, but society does kind of force us into boxes with quite clear divisions, and it's just indicative of that when you get a person who is both into one thing, let's say faith, and into another thing, which is fear and scary things, and the thought that should not match, that shouldn't combine. I totally get why people think that, of course, because it does sound weird.
It does.
It's me. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's something that makes you up, definitely. I mean, I do want to delve deeper in that, because there's so many questions and there's so many things popping up when you talk about that, and when we talk about faith. And and I'll take bits that I've taken from your book as well that have really intrigued me. But first and foremost, the first question that I always ask all my guests is, where did it begin for you? You know, what was it that set you off on this trail of high strangeness?
Well, that's a great question. And in some ways I could say it began at birth, in the sense that I feel like it's an inherent part of my personality. But I think I kind of started to discover what that was in the libraries of my youth, in two different types of library, the book library and also the video library, the VHS. I'm a very old person, so I can remember when VHS was a thing. And it was in those two places where I discovered myself get excited on a level which maybe I hadn't had before. So at school, I had friends who enjoyed football and sports and stuff, which I kind of like wasn't really interested in. And I tried to be interested in it, but it wasn't me, you know. But when I went into a library and I sort of discovered the unexplained shelf, or if I went into a video library and saw scary horror movies and supernatural movies on the shelf, that just did something to me. And I thought, hang on a minute, this is unlocking something quite meaningful. And so my interest in those things was very early on. And I found them to be a very positive expression of who I was, rather than oh dear, that's a bit worrying. I'm starting to like films where people get chased by, you know, killers with hockey masks. You know, I just thought, no, this is interesting to me. This is opening my mind to big questions.
Mm-hmm. So did people around you, did they worry about sort of you being into that stuff and you becoming more and more intrigued by that stuff?
Yeah, slightly. I do remember my English teacher and my art teacher on a parents' evening, and it was a time when I was sitting with my parents, and the teacher was just saying, every story he writes, you know, has a murder in it or has a monster in it, and every picture he draws is in art has got some sort of like blood and guts in it. And we're just asking, is it possible he could maybe try something else? And I do remember that I went through a stage where, like, even I think we did like some sort of project on Helen Keller. And so in the book, in my exercise book, I had to draw a picture of Helen Keller, but I thought, oh, it'd be interested to see what it looks like if she had no head and she was sitting on a horse or something. And I totally understand why people on the outside would see that as, man, this guy's gonna like end up being a crazy serial killer or something. But it really was, it couldn't be further from the truth. The reasons I was interested in these topics was not because I enjoyed real violence or death. It was actually the opposite. It was because I found those topics so frightening that I wanted to engage with them in a way that I could be in control of. I continue that today with writing, and podcasting. It's still the same principle of me as a little kid wanting to hone in on the things that frighten me and put them into a format that I could handle. And that, ironically, was exciting.
Yes.
Courage building.
Definitely. I think that there are different strands that people come into this with, and you've touched on two there. And one is that fear factor in being able to rationalise the fear that we have of, you know, the monster under the bed. And once we start facing those things on a regular basis, they become you become not desensitized, but the understanding of them, it kind of rationalizes them. And you've also said, and you touch upon this, you've just touched upon it, but you go in more depth in the book, The Frighteners, about our disconnection from death, and that being an element of why people do pursue these kind of avenues of watching scary movies. Can you talk about that for us a bit?
Yeah. Yes. In the book, there's the book, The Frighteners. It explores like all sorts of different aspects of morbid culture, and I'm there trying to defend it. So there's chapters on defending interest in the paranormal, interest in monsters, interest in true crime. And in the book, I travel all over the shop and do crazy things and sort of hunt for werewolves and all this crazy stuff. But yeah, there's a chapter on death, and it opens with me training as a minister and being taken into the kind of backstage of the funeral home.
I've just got to that bit, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty gross. And witnessing, what happens to a body. And I was quite kind of, in one sense, disturbed by that, but in another sense, it was really interesting. It really made me appreciate life. And so what can happen is, in a society which ignores death and tries to act as if it's not real, I can understand why people would do that, because it's so disturbing. But it can end up giving a kind of false impression of that we have limitless time, or that we can fritter away the days, or like Pink Floyd, that song Time, which is all about you wake up one day and 10 years have gone, which is actually a very depressing thought, but it can lead to a much more enriched life. And so in the book, I talk about how actually culture needs to have some sort of expressions of death in it. And since the sort of Victorian times, we found that death has been professionalized, and so we don't tend to see actual corpses, well, unless for a serial killer, of course. But we don't tend to see actual corpses in our homes, for example. That's been professionalized, and bodies get taken away, and there's good reasons for that. There's medical reasons, there's reasons of infection, but also as people got more money and kind of capitalism started to kick in, people had more money to spend on funerals, and then the insurance industry, and then the industry of undertakers started to take off. And so eventually bodies left a kind of immediate sight. And I'm not suggesting that I want to try and get corpses back into the mainstream, right? That's not what I'm suggesting.
Yeah.
But I am saying that something happens when we disconnect with the realities of death. And so it really is no surprise to me that human culture is ingenious, really, I think, in that it has tried to connect with these topics, but in fictional ways. And so in the book, I talk about how, in one sense, like when I go to a press screening of a terrible, really shocking horror film, and people are cheering when people are getting their heads chopped off or whatever, on one sense, you could say, wow, what's wrong with these people? They're twisted. Whereas in the book, I suggest that could be a sign of progress, because in the past, in the gladiatorial sort of battles of ancient Rome, we really, we were dealing with death by seeing real people dying in front of us. It's far better and far more progressive to come up with fictional ways where nobody actually dies. So yeah, I find the topic to be fascinating. And I just don't think it's dualistic, that you can come along and say, because you like that, and the people listening to this now or watching this, they might sometimes get the impression that there's something wrong with them. That maybe they drive in the car and they look and they see a car accident, and something in their head says, look at that, you should keep looking at that. And some people, particularly if they're religious, can get the impression that maybe that's because there's a demonic force telling them to do that, or that they're just sick. But actually, human beings classically are wanting to engage with the topics that are relevant to them. And death and suffering are 100% relevant to all of us. And therefore, it makes sense that we address them in one way or another.
Definitely. I mean, the only given that we have in life is that we're all going to die. And yet it's something that we do sort of shove to one side. I mean, and culturally, that, like you say, at the turn of the century, that's something that we are not privy to anymore. And even people dying, we're not privy to. And in the past, it's been something that became part of ceremony and ritual, where people would deal with those who were dying in a very sort of ritualistic way, for passing over to the other side. And we have taken that step back. And like you say, these movies are a safe environment where people can explore those questions within themselves without much conscious thought, because it's kind of playing out on a screen in this safe environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a chapter which explores zombies and how popular those guys are. And zombies are one of the prime examples of how we've used the kind of the motif of the zombie to we're literally saying, those bodies that we normally ignore,
Mm-hmm.
they will not allow us even to ignore them, because they are battering down our houses and doors and trying to get in. And sometimes, and this is often one of the kind of the dramatic twists of a great zombie film, is that they are our relatives or our friends, people who we loved and thought we'd never see again, and they are demanding attention. And that to me is complex. There's one of the reasons why it's popular, zombie films, is there's something more dramatic and more profound, I think, going on than just we like to see people eat brains.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As fun as that is, but it's just something profound going on. And so I don't like the idea of dismissing horror culture or people who like spooky and scary things because there's something wrong with them. Far from it. I think that it's quite normal, and I defend it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's if we go on from that, when in the book you also talk about going to these sort of scare houses. What's the terminology for those? Scare houses sounds
like
wrong.
Scare attractions in America. Yeah. Sometimes they call them haunted houses, which can get a bit confusing. But yeah, scare attractions where you go deliberately to have a kind of a thrill of walking through a house where people have set up skeletons and stuff.
I mean, I definitely find that as a paranormal investigator, and we run events, that you do get a large proportion of people that come along because they want to be scared, they want to be frightened. Why do you think that is? Why do people step into these, situations where they know they're going to, be screaming out loud or sort of absolutely terrified?
Well, I mean, it's a very satisfying experience to have an experience of fear from which ultimately you're going to be safe. And I mean, the cliche would be to say it's like a psychological roller coaster. I do think it's a bit more profound than that. I think that people going to enjoy the thrill of, let's say, a ghost hunt or a paranormal investigation yes, some people are going for the excitement of that, but I think there are deeper things going on as well. People hoping for perhaps an insight into what the future could hold for them, never mind just the experience. But yeah, but you can't get away from the fact, but it's fun. Like it's invigorating, and I can wax lyrical about the profound kind of reasonings behind these things, but ultimately they're just a really good laugh as well. And there's something interesting about this word genre, like the horror genre or the science fiction genre, that the base word for that comes from the same word as we have the word generic, which is like the same. And genre films, horror films, are often the same. I've lost count of how many horror films I've watched where, a couple break down in their car outside a mansion and it's pouring with rain and they go inside. You could say, how could you possibly watch that same film over and over again? But I gladly do, because it's fun and you're going through the motions over and over. But on a deeper level, because it's kind of predictable, you can step out of yourself a bit more and start to explore deeper things as you're doing it. So, I think it's absolutely fun and a good laugh. By the way, I'm not suggesting it's fun to watch like real death, as in snuff movies or something. That's like a completely different kettle of fish. And there's a chapter in the book which is about the murderabilia market. And that was probably it was the most disturbing chapter for me to write, because it was exploring how there's a market for people buying, souvenirs from great shocking crimes. So I had a lock of Charles Manson's hair in my hand up in York, with a dealer who was selling it for £40 a strand. And that's a thing, people are buying clumps of earth, like bags of earth that have come from where children have been murdered. And that to me is kind of a different level, because it's involving real people. And yet that chapter still was saying there's still more complex things going on for the people who are fascinated by real crime than just they're horrible. Sometimes there's quite complex things happening. So it's fun, and it's also exciting, and it's also profound. How could we therefore not, as a culture, have this as a key part of our expression of our humanity? We do. And so the people who think, oh, let's get rid of this stuff, society would be better if we got rid of this stuff. I think they're being naive.
Yeah, you do talk about there was a tribe, and forgive me, I can't remember what the tribe was called.
Yeah, the Gabusi tribe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where things had been, violence had been seemingly eradicated, and you were saying that the murder rate within that tribe was really particularly high.
yeah. They'd like decided, well, let's not tell each other scary, horrible stories. Yeah. All of our rituals will have absolutely no element of kind of blood or anything that could be construed as violent. And we would think, oh, well, that's the Shangri-La we should aim for. And they're killing one another in real life violence on a level which is mind boggling. And so it does rather suggest that these things can play a function, in society. But I haven't said all that. I do understand that some people just don't get this, and they will still, despite my kind of evidence I present, will look at me and say, but there's something not right about you. What went wrong for you to like this sort of thing? Were you attacked as a kid in the woods or something? And you're trying to unpack that for the rest of your life? Like, no. And the same with the paranormal. People could be saying, well, like, why'd you have to be obsessed with this stuff? What is it? What purpose is it serving? And some people just don't have that interest. There's an author called Lynn Hatcher, who describes it as the spooky gene. And he says, look, some people have got the spooky gene and some haven't. And so there's people I know who just glaze over. If I was to talk about some of the stuff we're talking about, not interested. And therefore, when they hear other people are interested, their conclusion is, well, they're weird and possibly dysfunctional. But I think for you and I and the people listening to this, we have the spooky gene and always have. And it's almost like my mission in life is to encourage people that that's okay and to be yourself. And as long as you're not like, murdering people to fulfill this desire, then you're all right by me.
I think for me growing up, it was a lot of fellow paranormal investigators come from, and people who are into this kind of thing come from a place of maybe they've had somebody pass over, and it's those very personal questions that have propelled them into this world. For me, it was very different. It was like you say about that spooky gene. It was always the feeling that there is something more, and it's that kind of curiosity to find, what is it? What is the something more? I can't accept that this is just it. This material realm is just it. And we were speaking just before we came and started recording about where your beliefs are, and could you explain that again? Where you sit on the scale of beliefs?
My beliefs in some ways are frustratingly vague, and I'm getting older now, and I've sort of ceasing to think that human beings have to be purely dualistic, right? In a sense that, when you're younger, you tend to think, you have to be one thing or another. So, for example, you have to be a Christian or a Muslim, or you have to be a spiritualist or someone who doesn't believe in that sort of stuff, or a paranormal believer or a staunch atheist. And for me, I find that some people are that, and some people are comfortable being 100% one or the other. But me, I'm a combination of contradictions. And so I love the paranormal and spirituality, and I'm a Christian as well. I didn't used to be. I was very anti-church growing up. But so I believe in God, let's say. But I also sometimes don't believe in that, in the sense that I sometimes think, well, it's possible none of this exists. It's possible all this ghost stuff, that everything reported in the Fortean Times is misconstrued. But I think it's possible to hold those two things in balance and just say, well, this is where I am. And ultimately, you just, the main question is not so much what you fully believe. It's almost like, which direction are you pointing in? And I would say I'm pointing in the direction of belief, in the sense that this is where I want to go. If I could be told tomorrow, you will get a definite answer on the topic of spirituality or anything other than the natural.
Mm-hmm.
Would I want it to be completely nothing, or would I want there to be something? I'm a something person.
Mm.
I want something. And a critic could come along and say you only want that thing because you're weak, or you're scared of death and stuff. And I get what they're saying, but that to me isn't really much of an argument, because just because you desire something doesn't mean that something doesn't exist, any more than if you're in a fire and you call the fire brigade and you're hoping the fire brigade comes. Your desire for that has no bearing on whether it exists or not.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, sometimes I can be in a frustrating position with some people. For example, a few days ago, I posted a picture, which is now, well, I didn't start this, but it's doing the rounds a lot, this picture of a Ouija board that's for sale in Poundland.
Yeah.
And people have been up in arms about that. And I posted this picture and shared it from a friend and said, look, they're selling Ouija boards in Poundland. And I didn't say anything other than, so I think I said something like, get the Ouija board and you can either experience a demon or a spirit or absolutely nothing, depending on what your belief is. So I tried to cover all bases. And then I got contacted a few days after that by a radio station called Premier Christian Radio that saw that and wanted me to come on to discuss the Ouija board. Mm-hmm. And I don't often say no to these sorts of things because, you want to kind of get people knowing about your stuff and promote things and all that sort of stuff. Quite happy to say that. But at the same time, I thought, I'm not doing this one because I just think my view on the Ouija board, let's say, is just far too, well, it's not one way or the other. So some people tell me, I used to do the Ouija board loads when I was a teenager. I made one in woodwork at school. And then I took it in the couple of weeks after and sawed it in half because I had a kind of weird experience with it. But the board itself, I never had an experience really that I could look back and say without a doubt that was not me subconsciously pushing it. I really wanted that. That's what I was desiring. That's why I did it. I wanted evidence. But so what's happening at the moment is with the Ouija board as an example, people are like freaking out. Like there's Christians are saying this is disgusting. This shouldn't be sold. And ghost hunters and some paranormal investigators are similarly saying like, this is a travesty. These are dangerous. These are doorways. You should be trained to use these. Whereas I am frustratingly in the middle of that. I'm like, I think there are some potential dangers with the Ouija board, particularly psychologically. And I'm open to the possibility of kind of evil spirits, but I'm also open to the possibility that it's just an unfairly kind of demonized thing that people get hysterical about because films like The Exorcist have presented it as a sheer doorway into the dark. And that can create a loop system where people are so scared and they think, oh, well, it's one thing, going on a ghost walk, but if we sit and do a Ouija board, everyone knows that's demonic. And then you start doing confirmation bias. And so if anything happens after that, you start reading into that evil. So I'm not suggesting, therefore, go out and do the Ouija board, but I'm also not suggesting if you've got one, you're satanic. And that's why I said no, because I thought there's no way I can fit all of that into a kind of 30-second soundbite. But that's I use that as an example of how sometimes it's frustrating to other people where you're not clearly one thing or another. But like here I stand and I can do no other, as they say. It's just who I am. Can't help it.
I'm definitely in your camp with that, and a good example of that is I do Ouija board, spirit board work. I'm quite old school when I go out onto paranormal investigations, just because I'm not a big tech buff, that's what I tend to do. And on one hand, I'm kind of intrigued about the experiences. I don't ever sit on the board with people. I facilitate it. But on the other hand, my sort of parapsychology head kicks in, and I actually do experiments with people on that, where I'll say to them, just give me free run on this. Can you all close your eyes and see if you're getting the same kind of movement and the same kind of lettering and pattern? And I've never had it where people have closed their eyes and have produced words or sentences, which that really intrigues me. So I step in both camps too, and I'm traversing between. I've had far too many freaky experiences, and come across people who've had those, but also on the other side, that I know, like you say, there's confirmation bias about things, and people will take personal experiences as personal experiences. It's absolutely fascinating.
It is fascinating, and you're dead right about the closing of the eyes thing, or maybe taking the board and turning it kind of 90 degrees and just see, can you do this upside down? And so, I totally get why it's possible that this thing is just, people pushing it subconsciously. I think it could be many times. But at the same time, and this is perhaps the reason why I can say all of this, but I don't do the Ouija board anymore. I stopped doing it. When I became a Christian, I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. And so I haven't done it since. And one of the reasons is because I just don't want to risk it. I was at a party the other day. Well, sorry, it wasn't a party. It was like in a garden with two other couples, at great distances. So, the version of a party these days. And so we're hollering at each other across the garden, what do you want? And all that. And at one point, I don't know why, but one of my friends, and she's a good friend of mine, she's not into this sort of stuff. We've never talked about this before. I don't know how we got onto the Ouija board, because this was before the Poundland thing. And she just says, oh, I remember when we used to do that at school as a kid. And I'm saying to her, like, oh, yeah, I used to do that. It was just one of those things, wasn't it? And eventually she got on to say, it was scary, though, when the thing was moving and we weren't touching it. And I'm like, whoa, hang on, what? And she says, no, like the planchette thing that they'd made one, homemade. It was moving and spelling things out, and no one was touching it at all. And that level of evidence, I think, is way more like convincing. That's the sort of stuff that stops me in my tracks and goes, hang on, maybe there is something. And another person recently, they told me about someone trustworthy, said that when they were kids, they did the Ouija board, and what was happening is it was moving so quickly, like it was on, and without gaps in words, that what happened was someone else had to like watch it and write down, like, and there was no possibility of kind of keeping up with what it was. And yet when they read it back, it was a coherent message. That sort of thing gives me a little shiver and pause. And so that's why I personally don't do it. And I'm not necessarily going out to advise people to do it, but I'm still not so convinced to be like super hysterical and say it's the absolute doorway to hell and Poundland should be, bombed or something.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I had an experience, and it's perhaps one that stands out in all my paranormal experiences, where it was a team only event. And so I was able to go on the board, and very, very quickly the board was going in the opposite direction to the planchette. So wherever we put the planchette, the board was spinning at such a speed.
Oh, the board was spinning.
The board was spinning, and we captured video evidence of that happening. And we tried to debunk it, and we came off, and we went back on with different people, and it was just, it was crazy. But I'm with you. It's if there is the potential of it being a bad thing to use, then you've got to be cautious with it. I tend to tell people, and it's with all kinds of calling out to spirit, if you are inviting things in, expect things to happen, and expect them not to be all good people. And I've said this before, you don't open your front door and shout out down the street, who wants a G&T, and expect all good people to sort of come into your house and have a G&T with you. You don't know you don't know who you're inviting in, so it's definitely a cautious thing. I want to get to the brass tacks with you, and this is sort of new chapter time. I'm really intrigued about, how did you get to Christianity? How did you get to the place where you were doing theology and going through to become an ordained is it minister, or
yes, my child.
Bless
Sorry,
you.
I had to do that. I am. I'm technically, I can kind of tick the Reverend box in government forms, and sometimes I get letters that say Reverend, and it's not just I didn't like pay $40 on the internet to get an ordained certificate. I went to college for 3 years and then did 3 years placement, and and got fully ordained. But these days though, because my writing career kind of started to take off. I mean, I still have to do lots of other things to supplement that. So I'm no J.K. Rowling by any stretch. So I do lots of stuff to do along with that. But I was starting to find that my creativity and my interest in writing and some of this weird stuff that I do. Sorry, I'm not calling you weird. I'm calling the topic weird.
I don't mind.
Yeah, exactly. It was taking me kind of a bit away from working at a church. So I think it was, maybe about 10 years ago, I stepped away from looking after a full-time church. And now occasionally, I'll occasionally do funerals or lead services. But I'm not looking after a church at the moment. And that's not because of any kind of scandal. I wasn't kicked out or anything. It's just this other stuff took off. So I'm still technically, ordained. And the reason I got into that is, it is a weird story, I suppose. But then I think spiritual journeys often are like slippery and unusual. Because I was very, very antagonistic towards Christians growing up. To an extent that was weird, I guess. I've just put together I've got this little mini ebook that I just did, which is kind of telling the story of how I struggled with Christianity and then became like a Christian horror fan or whatever. And in that, I tell stories about the sorts of things I got up to get at Christians at school, and the things I did that I'm not really proud of. But the reason, I think, was because I was terrified of Christianity turning me into something I wasn't, and being forced to become a certain type of person. And that was particularly expressed when I thought, hang on a minute, from what I've read, Christians disapprove of horror films. Christians wouldn't like me reading a book about a poltergeist, and I'm like, that's what I'm into. So why would I want to be that? And I hated that idea that I was told, you have to choose your interests or your interest in faith. And I thought, hang on, maybe there's more to it. But anyway, to cut a long story short, it was in university, actually, when I'd been very anti-church growing up and very antagonistic towards Christians. But then I did meet a girl who I really fancied. And I wasn't really a big commitment type of guy back then. I don't know how to explain that anyway, but I wasn't into that sort of thing. But I really liked her and I fancied her, and I thought, crikey, I could like proper go out with this person. So I asked her, and she said she didn't want to go out with me because I wasn't a Christian. And I was like, weird cult alert.
Yeah.
Who says that? That's bizarre. But also I did like her. And so I decided just to kind of maybe get to know her a bit and to show that I was reasonable and interested in what she was interested in. I went to the Christian Union, which was very strange to go there. And I think I was just shocked because up until that point, I'd never met like normal Christians. I think I'd seen Christians on TV and like Dot Cotton and Harold Bishop from Neighbours and stuff. And I was like, why would I ever want to be that? And then I saw televangelists on TV who were corrupt and horrible. Or I just saw in films, the clergy were either totally ineffectual or were like raging pedos. And I'm like, there's nothing about that that's attractive. But I just happened at university to meet intelligent people who were studying like, really decent degrees. They weren't there doing RE. They were doing all sorts of proper subject science and stuff. And yet they believed in this stuff. And I just started going, maybe, have I misjudged this? Even though I've got loads of questions and still have doubts. And so I made a decision to try it out and become a Christian. And it changed me. It really made a difference, a good difference in my life. But that doesn't mean that that somebody pressed delete on my personality. I am still the same person. I'm still have doubts. And I don't think you have to become, like a certain type of person to be a Christian. And the sad bit as well is that there's so many Christians out there who are very un-Christ-like, and they just give Christianity a really bad name, particularly in America at the moment. So yeah, I think I would say I'm a Christian, but mainly because I'm into like Jesus. That sounds a bit like hippie-ish, like, yo, man,
I know.
I'm just a Jesus guy. But I am, in a sense, I think Jesus is very progressive and very forward thinking. And I also think the Bible is not. Some people think the Bible, every verse of the Bible must be taken literally, and that's not how the Bible's written. It's an ancient text with lots of different genres in it. And so we're supposed to grapple with the Bible, and just picking up one verse and saying that sounds weird doesn't mean we dismiss it. And it doesn't mean we apply it. There's certain things in the Bible that are not applicable today, or that were allegory. And so we have to grapple with the Bible. But I can understand why people would dismiss Christianity because of how they see it in culture, or they'll think the Bible is like a hate text. Whereas my focus is on Jesus, who I tend to think is really kind of has the answers, in terms of forgiveness and loving one another. It's all quite Oprah Winfrey in a way,
It is, and you're right. It is that that Christ energy is very much that kind of hippie energy, isn't it? Where we're all brothers and sisters. We're all connected. I think the thing is, with when I meet people, when I'm doing these talks and when I'm out and about, the amount of people who have a strong sense of spirituality, whatever, if that's in a religious sense or a spirituality. And I think that it actually goes hand in hand with that spook gene, that spooky gene that we have. It's that wanting to know more and knowing there is more. And it is that in essence, isn't it? Sort of religion and spirituality is that in essence.
Yeah, absolutely. And essentially I would argue that the people who the kind of the paranormal boom that we've seen in the last sort of 15, 20 years or something, that is to my mind a modern spirituality, almost like a renaissance of like Victorian spiritualism, but fused in a more modern context. And so when people go into they're walking around in abandoned asylums and stuff, and they're waving around EMF meters and all this sort of stuff. In some ways, they're almost like sacred objects. They're devices and rituals through which normal human beings are trying to kind of push through the veil and discover something epic and cosmic beyond them. That's essentially what spirituality is and what religion is. And so it's in many ways I find it's the same quest. But what I find about that is that has the potential of being very vague and placing no demands on you whatsoever. It's just purely about the thrill, or indeed the comfort, or that. Whereas what I find challenging about Jesus is that it's got all the spiritual stuff, but it's also got the stuff about, but you need to forgive your enemy. Like you need to love others. You need to serve others. Like that sort of stuff is a drag. There's like all this extra stuff, which is about morality, I suppose, which is annoying, but actually I find that helpful, having that framework. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm not suggesting for a second that people who don't have faith or religion don't have morality. In fact, I would argue that they have morality so strongly. My atheist friends, my Satanist friends, still seem to have a moral framework that is so similar to mine, and to everybody else's, that to me, it's evidence that maybe it's been put there. All this stuff about us being made in the image of God, and why does altruism exist, and why does it feel good to help a little lady over the road and not good to stamp on her head? I guess it depends on who the old lady is. No, I'm joking. Oh, that's a bad joke. Sorry. But do you know what I mean? There's something valuable in and special about doing the right thing. And then a lot of us, when we do the wrong thing, there's this eternal sense of, I shouldn't have done that. That to me is really fascinating. It's kind of like, where does that come from? If it purely is survival of the fittest, why aren't we just taking out everyone
around us
who's a drag and taking them in the woods and executing them? Like, why don't we do that? I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm also I'm open to evolution. I'm almost like an evolutionary theologian in some sense. I'm quite happy to believe that we came and exist through evolution. But my just question is there an organizing principle behind that? So yeah, it's fascinating.
It is totally. I mean, for me, I kind of I have an open mind and an open heart to all religions, and the Christian God I like to see as the architect. You know, for the planet and the universe. Is, you know, and there are other sources of energies there, but Christian God is the kind of one who does the blueprints and kind of gets all the details down. That for me where I'm at with God.
Yeah, well, fair enough. Yeah.
So in terms of, because it's absolutely fascinating, in terms of what point did you say to yourself, you know, did you wake up one morning and go, you know what, I'm going to get ordained. I'm going to really commit to this.
Yeah, that was a good question. Excuse me, just having a cup of tea from my Love Boat mug. Yeah. You know, it didn't happen quite that simply. In fact, I was almost a bit reluctant about it because I was a youth worker at the time, a youth pastor. And after university, I was a singer for a while. So I was in a band and we were touring for a year. And then during that tour, we went to Buckinghamshire, where I saw a job on offer. And I thought, you know what, I'd like to do that. So I went to be a youth worker. And it was while I was a youth worker, a youth pastor, that I started to think, I wonder if I should get ordained. And that was not something I necessarily was keen on doing. Mm-hmm. And so my wife and I decided to try a kind of prayer experiment. And so we prayed and said, well, all right, God, if you really want this to happen, then send 50 individual people to say to us, I think you should get ordained. And it can't be like us prompting it. Mm-hmm. Right? We try to make it high, because I thought 50 is a lot of people.
Yeah.
And we can't say, do you think I should be ordained? Just leave it like that. And so we said 50. So she had her list in a little notepad and I had my list, and we would compare the list with one another. And as days progressed, she would come in and she'd say, I've had 4 people say that to me today. I got 4. And I'd said, I had 6 people say that to me today. And gradually it started going up and up. It did actually hit 50, which was crazy. But the number wasn't really the point. Even that was cool. The number was just a kind of a destination. It was the journey to that number that mattered, because we noticed that each day when we would connect with one another and compare the numbers, it would be exciting to have another one. And it would be like, oh man, I'm up to 15. Crikey, I'm up to 20. And that process kind of reprogrammed my mind into thinking that being a minister was going to be like, who would want to be that? To maybe this is something I should do. So yeah, so it hit 50 and I trained for ordination. But even when I was training, I remember talking to somebody at the Bible college I was at called Spurgeon's in London. And I said, I don't actually see myself though as like a pastor of a church for the rest of my life. I feel like I might end up doing something weird and I don't know what that is. And I said, is that a problem? And they said, no, keep going. Sometimes God uses people in unusual ways. And so when I stepped away from looking after a church, it was totally no shock, because I suspected I might end up doing something odd.
Odd.
I like odd. Yeah.
Odd's good. Definitely odd's good. So what kind of reaction do you get from the Christian community? Is it a mixed bag, or is it bias, or
Yeah. Well, I do get on the whole, a positive reaction. I was really quite encouraged. What's quite nice is like, if you get to know Christians, there are some crazy and frankly horrible Christians out there. So let's not pretend that, and they would put anyone off. They put me off, right? But they're on the whole, so many of them are so lovely and thoughtful and intelligent. And so I thought when I started sharing that I was into horror and spooky things, they would be like, back, creature of the night. But on the whole, many of them were really open to it, and they loved me and were willing to see me kind of flourish and become who I was supposed to be. So that was really encouraging. But there were others who struggled with it. Not many, but some. An example would be I had a book coming out and I did an interview on a radio station, a Christian radio station. And it turned out I knew a producer on that station. And they had told me, after I had this interview with this woman, they told me, that woman, she, the presenter, she sent emails out to everyone at the station to pray for her because she knew you were coming in.
What?
And she was worried that you would bring a demonic entity with you.
What?
Like, wow. And so some people, yes, will see my interests and think I'm off the rails. I can understand why they would think that, because you can't expect people who have been so like in one world to suddenly force them to be in another. And if I interviewed the head of the Satanic Temple last year for the Fortean Times, like that doesn't seem right, to the normal person. Like, how could you have a civil conversation with that? To me, it feels normal because I think that's what Jesus says, like connect with people, appreciate them. But I do understand that for some, it's a bit much. And so even though it makes me sad when people kind of dismiss me a bit, I'm not naive, and I can't expect them to be on the same page as me instantly. And the same goes with, some of my theological positions, like I'm not anti-evolution, for example, or I'm not anti-gay. And whereas I have other Christians who are much more traditional on that. And their main argument with me wouldn't be about ghosts and horror films. It would be about those sorts of things. So yeah, it can be a lonely road, to be honest, sometimes. But sometimes when you do pioneering type things, that's the precise nature of the road.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, where in terms of the Christianity, where there are, strong themes of the macabre and blood and guts, and also the extremes of demons, etc. And you have things like people within the church becoming exorcists or performing rites when people are haunted. It's kind of a funny thing that it's not accepted, because for you in that environment, it seems if you are pursuing these things, you're pursuing themes within the Christian sect as it is, isn't it? It's it's not outside of Christianity, and you speak in your book about the kind of macabre aspects of the Bible, because some of it's pretty grim, isn't it?
No, absolutely, yeah, and I think some of the biggest proponents against the sorts of approaches I take, the bottom line is, and this sounds kind of too simplistic, but I think it's true, is they don't happen to have the spooky gene, and so if you don't have that, it's just baffling as to know, like, why would you even want to see that sort of thing, and so why you rationalize interest in the macabre. And you end up basically creating a dysfunctional human being. You start saying, oh, well, there must be something wrong with you. Because I would never dream of watching that sort of thing. And so I think a lot of the people who struggle with it are, they're just not into it. And but to me, that's down to a sense of kind of fashion or style or personal preference. But yes, I suppose at the end of the day, I'm saying it is quite complicated. And I do appreciate when people struggle with my approach or with the sort of stuff you do. Like, for example, a lot of Christians really struggle with paranormal investigation and would call that to be dangerous and kind of and opening people up to dangerous sort of spiritual activity. And on one hand, that's frustrating to think, like, are you sure about that? And what verses have you got for that? And an example would be, for example, that a lot of evangelicals would say all ghosts must be demons.
Yeah.
And actually, when you look at the Bible, sometimes there's examples of ghost activity, or references to ghosts that are not therefore said that they're demons. And the Catholics are a bit better at this. Catholics are a bit more open to the potential of ghosts existing, whereas staunch evangelicals say, you die and you go straight to heaven. There's no messing around. So there isn't really any kind of middle ground for spirits to kind of hang about. And to those sorts of people, I just I just go, because they tend to, in their desire to stay true to one particular text, they dismiss an entire community of lovely people who are honestly, genuinely just on the journey like the rest of us, trying to figure out life. So when I've been to speak at paranormal conferences, for example, I can see that people are surprised that I'm there, and that I'm not there to shut it down or to complain. I'm there to kind of journey together. But I am, and that doesn't mean that I have to kind of sort of fully do everything they do. Like I say, I don't do Ouija boards and that sort of stuff. But yeah, ultimately, I think it's worth listening to other people before talking at other people.
Definitely changing topic, because I'm very, very mindful of time, and I've got, quite a few questions, and it's going to be sort of,
okay,
I think, quick fire on these.
Yeah, sure.
Freakiest moment, freakiest experience that you've had.
Well, I've had a few freaky experiences. I mean, I'd say as a young person and as a teenager, we used to go on ghost hunts quite a lot. And I had an experience, in fact, just a sec. This is my second novel called Unleashed, which explores the poltergeist and the paranormal. And this, in the back of this, I share a real story about something that happened to me. Just when I was a teenager, we went on this sort of ghost hunt, and we went into this kind of, not an asylum, but it was a kind of sanatorium type place, a place for people to sort of convalesce when they had mental issues. And we hopped the wall, went in. I can't remember if we did a Ouija board or not, or if we were just sort of looking around. And just at one point, a few of us, but definitely me, looked up on the roof of this place, and I saw some sort of weird silhouette of an animal human hybrid. That's the only thing I can think of. It was so weird. It wasn't a ghost, but it almost looked like just this weird combination of things standing up on the roof and then crouching down to look at us, and we just like freaked and ran. And I ran home. I got home. I got my diary out, and I wrote all of this down. And then I was like, I want to go back and see that again. And over the years, for some reason, I just started to describe this thing I saw as the black rabbit. Because that's kind of what it was like, this black rabbit.
Honestly, I've got to stop you there, because that's really freaky. I did a podcast with a lady in America. I was being interviewed, and she said, I've had the freakiest thing, because my kind of nickname is Hair Girl, as in Bunny Rabbit Hair Girl. She said, I've had this freakiest thing. I've encountered this huge black rabbit. And she said it was something like a Donnie Darko kind of thing. And she said, and she said it was bizarre, because it was just as she was getting to the point where she wanted to message me about interviewing. She didn't know whether there was a connection. And other than you and this lady, I've never come across a crypto
That's weird.
Yeah.
Can I ask, are you able to say who that person was or what the show was?
I will find out the details.
It's not Karen Rontowski, is it?
It wasn't hers. No.
Okay. It's just I was a guest on her show the other day, and she asked me a similar question, and I told her this story, and she stopped me, and she said that she had this thing.
Yeah, because I was a guest on her program as well, and we talked about the imp that she had in her property, because she knows I'm kind of fairy lead on things in the paranormal. So that connection again is just bizarre.
Yeah, it was spooky, and in this book I go on later just talking about how that wasn't the only time I experienced that, and it came back a bit later. But this book, this novel specifically explores the black rabbit, and it's a kind of crime fiction novel wrapped up in the supernatural. And but the main kind of character, the enemy, the killer, is it real or is it sort of supernatural? Is this black rabbit? But that was an experience that was scary. I had an experience earlier this year which turned out to be fine, but at the time it was scary because let me see. I'll get this. I'm just going to grab something for you. Yeah, I was watching Knight Rider, the TV show at home on a Saturday afternoon, and I got a knock at the door, and I got this parcel delivered, and I opened this parcel, and inside was a letter, and this weird old bottle which
Okay.
rattles.
That looks like
And
a witch's bottle to me.
yeah, and so the letter inside gave this long story about somebody who'd moved into a farmhouse and they had discovered this. And since they discovered this, this was an anonymous letter, by the way. Since they discovered this, weird things were happening in their house. Their cat had gone missing. They started seeing like weird black figures in their house. And so they were scared. They knew about me and they thought maybe I would be more protected or something. I don't know. So they sent this to me. And it was totally anonymous. And I'm like, what the heck? And I called my publisher because I had a book coming, a different book. My latest book is about demonic possession, the novel. And there's a kind of haunted object in that. And I thought, is this the publisher doing this? This is clever. And so for about a week and a half, 2 weeks, my wife was not keen on this, thinking, what the heck is this? But, and this is where the twist comes and probably disappoints everyone. It turned out that it was a prank. Which was performed by, I don't know if you've ever met the great Richard Freeman, who's a cryptozoologist.
Yes. I do know him. Yeah.
So I'm friends with Richard. You know, we do have a laugh and we share interest in horror, and he thought it would just be fun to have this experience. And so for me to have a kind of spooky, so it was actually quite fun once I knew it wasn't real. But it was weird because we just moved to a new house and I couldn't understand. But one little thing to add to that is, on the day this came, just before I was watching Knight Rider, I was doing the washing up, and I dropped a knife in the kitchen, and the knife fell on the floor. And when it hit the floor, it rotated like this, like not super fast. Sorry, like not unearthly fast, but it was just doing that, spinning on the floor. And I'm like, huh? And I grabbed my phone. And I filmed this and put it on Twitter. And I'm like, check this out. I really am convinced that it was just a weird quirk of physics that it hit a bump in the floor. I don't know how, but it was weird. But it was within 20 minutes, 30 minutes when this arrived. So that all came together really well. So yeah, there's a few freaky experiences.
I mean that the thing, the other explanation, the other side of it could be, and we experience this all the time within the paranormal, that once you're in that mindset and that you've opened your mind, say that you've got this object and you're in this kind of this zone of mindset, you put that energy out into the universe, and the energy, it kind of has a laugh with you and provides it back and says, all right then.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I've still got this little thing.
Where is it from though? What's in it?
It's amazing. I mean, at first I thought, is it got teeth in it or something? Because it's got that kind of that kind of rattle. But actually, this is made by an artist on eBay called the Flesh Crafter, I think, and he makes all sorts of stuff. It's really convincing.
There's some brilliant artists out there. I don't know. I've recently been sort of put onto. It's an artist who I followed for a long time, but somebody said, have you seen this? Somebody's got like loads of crypto sort of mummified things in their basement. And I was like, hold on a minute, I know what that is. And that's Alex CF, who check out his work. It's very macabre and but it's also linked in with the Fortean sort of theme to it. And he made up this whole story about a Victorian gentleman, basement, and the basement had been knocked through and they found all these artifacts, I love it.
People seem to enjoy that, and I do, that kind of embedded narrative fiction that sort of bleeds over into your life. I like that sort of thing. It's almost like a kind of role playing, or a sort of just a strange experience that you can have, and it can be fun.
Yeah, and it's definitely plays into that I want to believe, that kind of I think the other thing for me is with all this is as adults we learn we unlearn how to play, and we unlearn how to be curious, and we're told that being curious and playing and having an imagination is something as adults we really shouldn't do. And all these kind of spooky subjects are definitely something that allows us to explore those things. And you'll find a lot of people in this kind of field will be like yourself, will be musicians, or will be artists, or be writers who will be creative on top of that. So
yes, that's interesting. So I'm trying to sort the sun out here. And I think that's true, because creativity basically just says, well, there's a blank page, and the creatives of the world tend to get excited by that and think, oh, the possibilities, what could be there? Oh, that's interesting.
mm-hmm.
But I think we creatives need to also appreciate what it's like to be a non-creative. And for non-creatives, sometimes they can see the blank page and go into a sense of unease and panic and think,
Mm-hmm.
where is the framework? This doesn't make sense. And so when you move into the kind of the paranormal world, or the spiritual world, there is this sense of, well, this is too much of a blank page,
Mm-hmm.
and people who draw these frameworks as well, you're like, well, how do you know? Like this thing about the Ouija board where people say you can only do them if you've been properly trained. It's like, how do you know? Like, how do you know how to train people? Like, where did you get this from? So the frameworks are all over the place. For me, I find that in some ways quite exciting. So you think,
Mm-hmm.
who knows what could happen? But for others, it's actually quite a disconcerting and frightening
experience,
or just unconvincing. Just like,
yeah.
it doesn't make sense unless there's logic behind it. So yeah, and that's just why I think we have to appreciate each other's psychology,
Mm-hmm.
and not just like if someone comes in and says to you, fairies, idiot,
Yeah,
like I'm sure you've had that before.
all the time.
Yeah, and that must be really annoying to experience that. But and it shouldn't be expressed in that way either.
Mm-hmm.
But it's to expect someone to come along to your way of thinking or my way of thinking quickly is quite ambitious, especially if they have a sort of I need a framework type of psyche.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely experienced that with fairy, because I mean, although I've got the pictures behind me, I'm definitely of the school of thinking of old folklore where these things are not nice, and they do play a part in the darker side of hauntings that happening, whereas once poltergeist activity was seen as a house brownie or seen as a gremlin or a goblin, we now call it a poltergeist, and those crossover links.
Okay, yeah.
So I'm not Tinkerbell. I'm definitely not from the unicorns and bubble school of thinking.
Right.
Although
Okay.
I would like to think that kind of thing does exist as well. But I'm definitely drawn to, I suppose, the more macabre side, the darker side of faith, which freaks people out even more, because they expect me to be kind of love and light and bubbly with it, and I'm actually like, no, I've come across far too many stories about these things biting people, pinching people, causing havoc in houses. So just I am seriously mindful of time. There's two last things I want to do with you. This is going to be one of those things that you just go, I don't know, but I've got to ask. We're coming up to Halloween. Top 5 Halloween watches. Top 5 Halloween films for people.
That's hard, because it's like making me choose between my children. But I mean, I would advise people to try out some. I mean, there's some recent films on Netflix which kind of worth watching. There's a good comedy which is called Housebound, which I thought was good, a good horror comedy. There's classic films that are of recent years, like The Babadook. If anyone's not seen that, that's worth seeing. For me, my favorite ghost movie of all time is The Changeling, from 1980, which I just think is a stunning and beautiful film. I love Dawn of the Dead, the original. I met George Romero once, and he was absolutely. Yeah, I did. It was amazing.
Wow.
I met him in Milton Keynes.
What?
I know. Yeah, I was at Milton Keynes shopping for something, and he was sitting on a table, like at this like signing thing, And I'm like, that's flipping George Romero. No one was up to him, and I went up and talked to him, and we had a good chat, and he was lovely. But I mean, I love the horror films from my youth, particularly because they kind of draw me back to a kind of a safe time, I suppose. So that I find them quite comforting. But no, there's plenty of cool modern horror films out there too. Mm-hmm. That wasn't 5, but
that wasn't 5, and that's kind of given everybody a lot of scope to sort of go and find out. The last little bit that I want to do with you is some shameless plugging. Can you just talk us very, very quickly through your novel series, because it's not just the one book that you've shown us, or the two books that you've talked about.
One moment, hang on. Yeah, my novel series follows this character called Matt Hunter, and so this is the first one, Purged, and then that explores a Christian serial killer who decides to baptize people so they become Christians, and then murder them immediately afterwards so they don't lose their faith and go straight to heaven. So he thinks he's doing a nice thing, but he's actually a psychopath. So yeah, Matt Hunter, by the way, is an ex-church minister turned atheist professor. So he's uses his skills to solve religiously motivated crimes, but there's lots of kind of folk horror, supernatural stuff. In this case, Unleashed, that's the second one. He's on the trail of the Black Rabbit, this strange kind of paranormal entity that he believes is just a physical flesh and blood killer. In the third book, Severed, he encounters a pseudo-Christian cult who think that God the Father murdered Jesus on the cross because he was jealous of his fame, and so they're Christians who despise God the Father and worship Jesus. So that's pretty crazy, and people get someone nearly gets their head chopped off at the beginning of that, which is nice. This is the latest book, Possessed, which came out this year, and that explores the recent growth in demonic possession cases and the demand for ritual of exorcism. And in that book, Matt is trying to deal with people who claim a murder is based on someone who's demonically possessed, when he's saying, don't be stupid, it's not. But that's what these books are about. They're about the clash of worldview between those who think there's no such thing and Matt who thinks there's no such thing, and others who think there absolutely is. And then, finally, my book, The Frighteners, Why We Love Monsters, Ghosts, Death, and Gore. Yeah, which was just absolute blast, and I could say a blessing to write, really, because I got to travel to Transylvania and Rome and then all across Britain, meeting just absolutely wonderful people who taught me a lot about why we like these sorts of things. And finally, as another plug, this is my kind of latest project. Can
you talk about this? Because I completely missed that. Yeah, can you talk about what this is about?
This is my latest project, which is crazy, but it seems to be connecting with people. It's called Creepy Cove Community Church, and it's a podcast, which is literally every 2 weeks, I put together full church services that are broadcast from a haunted fishing town called Creepy Cove. And this church here, the one on the peak, basically just shares their services every 2 weeks. And so if you listen to this, you will be in a full immersive audio experience of going to church. So there's spooky hymns, which I write, and there's a kind of horror themed sermon. There's meditation and prayers, which are all quite eerie. And there's appearances from horror film characters. Just today, I'm just editing a conversation between me and Pennywise the clown from It. And it's all pretty crazy, but the point of it is for it to be a safe space in which for people to explore Christian spirituality, or just spirituality, or just to explore their own beliefs. Maybe they don't have a belief at all, and it's safe for anyone who's into that. But it's supposed to encourage people, a mix of comedy, a mix of music, and genuine kind of encouragement. It's like sort of Songs of Praise meets Stephen King, and I do that, and I also have a Patreon linked to that, because thankfully people are starting to get into it and feel like it's helping them, and they want to kind of support it. But with my Patreon, if people join that, then they get to have access to the Peter Laws podcast, which is a weekly show which explores Fortean and strange things. And they also can have access to kind of free physical things, and also lots of kind of crazy stuff, audio stuff. Like last week, we put out a fitness class called Jogging with Jason, which is Jason Voorhees from the Friday the 13th movies.
Mm-hmm.
And you put that in your ear and you go for a run for half an hour, and you got Jason Voorhees sort of chatting you through how to run, giving you the timings, but then killing campers along the way. I had a shark exorcism a few weeks ago. So it's all
exorcism.
A shark exorcism, yeah. Because Creepy Cove is kind of like it's supposed to be in people's minds almost like a real place.
Mm-hmm.
So people who follow it connect with it in almost like a real way, even though they know it's not real. So if we have a service and I'll post pictures of lost property, someone left this last night, or a few months ago we had Carrie from the film and the book Stephen King's Carrie, and she was live tweeting through Creepy Cove asking for advice about going to the school prom that weekend, and people were chatting to Carrie, and at some point it got quite profound, people sharing advice about how to deal with bullying, and somebody, and this is just me, I'm Carrie, I'm like making this stuff, everyone knows that. But at one point,
don't burst that bubble. Let us think that it is those people. Don't burst that bubble.
Yeah, okay, yeah, forget all that. It's really Carrie. But at one point, I saw someone tweeting, "I can't believe I'm sitting here in tears because I'm having a conversation about how horrible my bullying is with Carrie." And they know it's not real. But this is my point about maybe creativity, but also what we talked about, the kind of the blended narrative stuff. People seem to connect with this because it's a safe church to go to.
Yeah.
But also it's weird and it's horror themed and super spooky. But even though it's all of those things, it's helping people, which matters to me. People seem to be encouraged by it. So that's good for me.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I'll definitely check it out and see what's what. Where can people find you? Just plug social media platforms,
Sure.
and you've got your own website as well.
Yes,
I've kind of had a flick through that.
Yeah, so Creepy Cove is available in all the normal places. You can just ask Alexa if you want. Alexa, play Creepy Cove Community Church podcast, or Spotify, Apple Podcasts. But if you go to creepycove.com, that will give you all of the links for that. peterlaws.co.uk is linked to that, which has got all my stuff about the other things that I do. And you can follow me on Twitter at RevPeterLaws, Facebook Peter Laws, and I'm out and about, and very, very happy to interact. And Patreon, which is the core thing for me at the moment, is it's patreon.com/Creepy Cove, and that is been fun because we're developing it's a small but growing cool little clan of people who have shared interests and connect with this. So that matters to me. That's important. So thank you.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I do suggest that people go out and find your books. I mean, I'm a big bookworm, so I'm always interested in books that come out, and it was specifically the one that was about your story and about why people like the grotesque. But having heard you talk about the non-fiction, the fiction series that you did, I'm definitely thinking, especially that Dark Bunny Rabbit. I'm thinking that maybe there's those synchronicities in there that I've got to go through them as well.
I was over the moon when I got some messages from people who said with that one that they were struggling to finish it because they were getting too scared, and I was like, come on,
wow, that's good.
That's what I like. Yeah,
definitely.
There could have been an excuse. It could have been just like, I'm struggling to finish this because I'm bored. I mean, scared.
No, I think it is. I think genuinely you have that kind of good base background by the sounds of it, that knows the kind of good formulas to make people
I hope so,
be fearful, which is something that should go down in your CV. I can make people fearful.
Yeah.
It'd be a good one.
In a totally legal way, which is good.
In a totally above board way.
Yes.
Peter, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. Like many of my guests, but you in particular, I could speak to you all day about this subject because I know that we've only touch the surface of where you're at and your experiences, and such an interesting guy. And people, please go out and check out the webpage, and follow Peter on social media platforms, because I've started following him on Facebook, and it is a really lovely mix of kind of the light-hearted, the more serious, and the macabre, which is a good mix for me, definitely. So thank you so much, and I might at some point drag you back. I'm sure there'll be questions that people want to know, specifically, about that curious combination of Christianity and horror. So I'm sure people will have a lot of questions. And listen, I'm going to put this out there: if you ever want to come ghost hunting, come out with the guys from Ghost Founded Paranormal Society. We would love to have you along. It would be an absolute pleasure. I'm saying that actually, and I know Barry, my boss, will be fine about that, but I don't care. I'm asking you you anyway. So
thank you, that's very kind of you, and thanks for having me on. It's been fun.
It's been lovely. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye everyone.
Bye.